Today, we're talking about a documentary series on Netflix, which is based on the Boston Red Sox baseball team. As a parent and as a coach, you have certain responsibilities to ensure that your kids are inspired by sport in the right way, enjoy sport, and have a healthy relationship with sport. Now, this podcast, this episode is for some real difficult issues. And we're going to talk about Jarren Duran and about what he said about his childhood and what his relationship was. And he speaks a little bit about his relationship with his dad and talks about one incident in particular, which I'm going to go through. Welcome to Ben. How are you, Ben?
I'm very good, thanks. And I'm looking forward to this episode in many different ways because baseball isn't a sport that I, before now, had a huge interest in. And I remember it was halfway through the last season of the podcast that you had an idea to do this episode and recommended that I watch the Clubhouse docuseries on Netflix. So I did. And in particular, the episode we're talking about is episode 4. So I watched it back then and I actually rewatched it last night. And it is a really great episode in the terms of it shows what high-level sports people go through, but also talks about the upbringing that the particular sports star in the episode, Jarren Duran, went through. So it's got some really good talking points. So I'm looking forward to this episode because one, it's a new sport for me. And two, it's got some really key messages.
Yeah. So let's start with going through that scene in the documentary with Jarren Duran, who plays for the Boston Red Sox. So I'm just going to read this, which is how it went on the documentary. So he starts off by saying, "I feel like everyone has gone through that, especially when they expect you to do good." That's referring to his dad. So they always want to be tough on you. There was a time where we were playing at the park by my house and I wasn't swinging the best. So he threw balls at me to hit me. "Be better. Come on. You've got to be better. Get better," he would say. Then it cuts to his dad, who is on the documentary as well. And he says that was the tough love between us. I expected perfection from him. Then it goes back to Jarren Duran. And he says, "Of course, all the kids..." Sorry, he says, "Of course, I went crying home and told Mum, Dad threw baseballs at me. And then I went back to the park and my dad's just sitting there and he goes, I knew you would come back." And he finishes that segment by saying, "Honestly, I just wanted to be better for him." So Jarren Duran says, "I just wanted to be better for my dad." Jarren Duran went on to have and still has an incredible career. He's an incredible baseball player. But my question is, at what cost? Is he happy? I don't know. Why does he play? I don't know. Does he want to be great baseball player because he loves baseball? Does he want to be a great player because he, how he was raised by his dad and he wants to please his dad? I don't know. But one thing that really concerned me about this whole scene is that it's actually not that uncommon. It's not that uncommon. And I saw it when I was a strength and conditioning coach working in elite sport, and I saw kids with their parents, and it's almost like a trophy kid situation where they would want their kid to be really great at this sport, basically for them. Not that, okay, they're going to be great at sport, and probably Jarren Duran's dad probably has no regrets because he's got what he wanted. His son is a superstar in terms of a baseball player. But for me, when I look at it, I think, and with my own kids, I just think I'm not bothered whether my kid becomes really, really great at sport. I just want them to be happy in their life. So at what point does it Does a parent think, I really want my kid to be great at sport? And why? So that's my question to you, Ben. Why do parents think this? Why do they really want their kid to be great at sport? Why do they treat them in a way that's not acceptable to get them to be really great at sport?
Yeah, and I think the episode, it has lots of different points in it where even before that kind of segment came up, you're thinking to yourself, this boy is being, not dealt with in the best way when it comes to his sporting career, his sporting journey early on. And you can see why he struggled at times early in his career with coping with the pressure, and that showed in his performance. It talks a lot about things like dropped catches in the outfield and not hitting properly and having a lot of pressure on him. Like sport in particular, in general, comes with a lot of pressure from crowds. Baseball, from again not knowing the sport, is particularly vicious by the sounds of it, from abuse about, the crowd shouting to him about toughening up and being weak, and he showed his own strengths, struggles with mental health, and at times he got into arguments with the crowd and he was going backwards and forwards, which is unseen a lot in English sports, British sports, where the players don't really interact with the crowds, but in baseball and in that particular scene, it did. But I think it comes from right early on. One of the other things that stood out for me is his father basically saying to him, "Why aren't you growing?" He was a small child by all accounts until he got to the point of college, and then he had a bit of a growth spurt. But very early on, it was almost as though his dad was blaming him for not growing and being big enough to play a sport. So not only was he being told that he maybe wasn't very good and was getting balls thrown at him to toughen him up, if you want to say that, but he was already facing the fact that he was probably feeling like he was inadequate. He called himself in the episode, he knew that he was the runt of the litter. He was too small. And before he's even got to a point of dealing with professional sport and the pressure that comes with that, he's got the biggest pressure that anybody faces, and that's the pressure of his own dad, his parents. And I think that it's really sad that happened to him. Yes, he overcame that to become a fantastic, amazing baseball player, but at what cost? And there are clear points in that program, that documentary, where you could see that the enjoyment had been sucked out of a sport that he does quite clearly love for whatever reason. But you've got to ask yourself, why was that? And the episode kind of goes on to show that his happiest time and overcoming the sport and the pressure was when he ended up playing for Mexico, representing, his country, and the fact that he just enjoyed sport. And he said that was kind of the catalyst for dealing with the pressure. But should he have faced that pressure in the first place? Absolutely not.
Yeah, because he struggled with depression and he's quite open to that. And there was, like you said, there was quite a devastating point within his career where he almost had like the golfer's jips, where he struggled to catch a ball or do the simplest things. You wonder why that is, and psychologically it'd be really interesting to unpack that. And we're not psychologists, but it would have been very interesting to see what the Red Sox psychologists thought about that, and why that was the case, and whether that was anything to do with how he was brought up. Because here's the question: is Jarren Duran as good as he is because of his dad pushing him to be better? In his words, be better, get better, be better. Is he as good as if he hadn't have done that? If his dad hadn't have done that, would Jarren Duran be as good? And here's the next question: if the way that we kind of know that sports parents should be with their kids, would Jarren Duran, would he have been a better player if his dad would have just have been supportive? Whether he, not based on performance, not based on anything, just supportive in the ways that we know that he should have been. So, and it's a $1 million question, isn't it? But would he have been better without his dad, or would he have been worse? Not without his
I
dad, but if his dad is, treating him different.
Yeah, I I think there's some key roles, and we've spoke about this in the past when we had Matt Taylor on and Ross Burberry on the podcast in season 1. There's roles within sport, certainly in youth sport. There's the role of the coach and there's the role of the parent, and they're two different things, in my opinion, and should always remain separate. One of the key things in that documentary is when his dad said, "I've been coaching him since he was 5."
Yeah.
Have you been coaching him since he's been 5, or have you just been putting pressure on him since he was 5? I get he could have been the coach of the local baseball team and Duran was in that team, but you didn't distance yourself from the role of your coach to your parent yet, because you probably coached him like you coached all the other kids on the team. But where were you as a parent in that respect? Like, did you do we talked about the car journey ride. Did you put the towel around him when it was cold? I mean, America is probably not going to be cold, but did you talk to him about just on the car ride home, what he enjoyed about the game, or, should we stop and get a milkshake or do whatever? So I think the first thing is his dad struggled to separate the two parts. Yes, he got him into the sport of baseball because obviously he probably introduced him to it. But I think as soon as he started to put the pressure on him and didn't take the role of father and coach separately, I think that pressure started to come on. Now, to answer your question about would he have been better without his dad,
Without him, but
without his dad
being more supportive.
pressurizing him, coaching him, yeah. I think you can only go on what you see in in the episode. He's a very good player. He's made it to a very high level. But at the time at the end of the episode where he starts to talk about how he started to play his best baseball was when he started to find ways in which he could take the pressure off. And there's a really key moment, and they wrap the episode up in a very nice way where they show him playing for Mexico. He's jumping around with his teammates with a sombrero on, and then they're all celebrating and they're having this great time. And he openly says, I don't know the exact word, but like kind of the shackles came off when he started just to have fun.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing. Arguably, his dad played baseball. His dad seems like an athlete, well-built guy, and Duran obviously would have followed that potentially. But had the pressure been taken off earlier, who knows? He could have been even an even greater player. And let's face it, the facts are that he didn't have an easy ride into the majors. He had quite a difficult ride. He was 7th draft pick for Red Sox. So arguably, he probably could have been even better if the pressure was taken off earlier. And that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you look at some of the other athletes in the world that may have struggled with times when they're not as good as what they could be. So let's take Emma Raducanu as a great example. I mean, she burst onto the scene with winning the US Open at such an early age. And then, with one thing or another, she struggled with injuries and pressure, and the world's attention was on her. And then she really struggled to find her stride again. And then there was one point, I think it was last year, I heard her come out and say, "Do you know what? I'm just enjoying swinging again, just swinging, being free within the swing." And it just sounded like she's sorted out her head. She's sorted out the pressures that were just outside noise. And Novak Djokovic talked perfectly on this. I just shared on my stories on my Instagram only today that I'm not going to put this as eloquently as what he did, but he said he was asked what is the biggest challenge, and he said it's to deal with the inward things, the psychological things, the inward, how I apply. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was all about how he dealt with pressures and all that kind of stuff. And I think the key here is Jarren Duran was not given those set of skills for whatever reason in his childhood, he was not given the fact that actually it's all right just to go out and swing because you're super talented. You go out, you swing, and you play how you want to play because you're just you've had the ability, and it's okay, to have a bad day. It's okay.
Mm.
And I don't think he was ever told that. I don't know, but it just seems that he's never told that because he went through that really terrible time at the Red Sox where he just couldn't really swing, he couldn't catch, and all this kind of stuff. It just didn't seem like he was equipped with any of that. And I think, personally, he would have been better equipped to deal with that. He would have been a better player if his dad would have just, taught him that at a really early age.
Yeah, I think there's a clear pressure that he's dealing with, and in my opinion, it comes from that early pressure that was put on him. I think the key thing is that you have to allow your kids to try sports. You have to allow them to enjoy sports, and you have to allow them to find the sports that fit their character and that they might be good at. And if they're not good at it, if they're enjoying it, that's great. And that's kind of where I sit with sport and what I want my girls to basically end up doing with. I couldn't care less whether they end up playing a sport, that I want them to play. I would rather them be active and happy and have enjoyment. Whatever level they play that to, I couldn't care less. I know sadly that there are people that kind of almost live their sporting, what's the word, their sporting needs through their children.
Yeah.
And that for me is a great shame because not only does the child potentially run the risk of not enjoying that sport, they also have to cope with the potential that at some point they're going to let their parents down. And you should never have to shoulder that pressure that you're going to let your parents down, because as long as you're doing something you're enjoying, why should you have to ever deal with that pressure? It takes me to a great thing that actually happened this past weekend. We, as a family, were invited to come to your son's birthday. I don't want to call it a party because it was unlike anything I'd been to. It was a get together, but it was a sporting get together. And what I remember feeling when I drove away from that gathering after we'd had something to eat and stuff like that was the fact that there was adults and children trying sports they might be familiar with, but sports that they're not familiar with. And in particular, we played American football and baseball. Now, I'd never played either of those sports. And I came away from it thinking, I really enjoyed that, but not necessarily for my own experience. It was to see my two girls and the other children there trying different sports that they'd probably never tried before with zero pressure on them.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you there. And I enjoyed the ice cream afterwards.
Very, very good way to finish a birthday party, yeah.
Yeah. So let me give you a bit of a background on that. So we have, as some of the listeners may know, Minneapolis is expanding into the US and has been for the past year, 18 months. So that means Ben and I get to travel together sometimes, and Claire and I, my wife, who's a co-founder of the business, get to travel throughout America, and we take our kids with us. So we have exposed our kids to a lot of sports that they wouldn't have normally have been exposed to. So my son, so Seamus, now has a bedroom with he supports 6 teams. Can you name
them all?
Can you name those teams, Ben?
Can I name them?
They're different. I'll give you a clue. It's different sports. All are different sports. Actually, it's 5. It's 5. They're all different sports. Here we go.
So I supported one of them for the day, the other day, because Seamus told me I had to. So I had to support Nottingham Forest for the day, for his birthday. So that's Nottingham Forest for football. I'm going to go with, based on where you've travelled to recently, we'll go with New York Yankees.
2.
We're going to go with another place you've travelled to recently and had the pleasure of going to. I'm going to say the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
3. God, this is good.
I'm then going to have to say, no doubt, there's going to be a hockey team in there.
Ice hockey, yep.
So I'm going to go with, this is where my knowledge lets me down. Met.
So New York Rangers. But I'm going to give
Rangers.
you it. 4. One more.
The other one's got to be
4.
basketball.
Yes. I'm not sure you'll get this one.
I'm going to take a punt on Lakers.
So the Charlotte Hornets.
Charlotte Hornets, of course. I should have thought. If I'd have looked
Yeah.
inside your passport and looked at the stamps, I'd have probably got them all right.
Yeah, probably. So, yeah, well, we've gone through these American sports. And by the way, oh my goodness me, do America know how to play sport? They just, I mean, it's just you go to the event. It's not just the sport. You're getting all kinds of different things that are so entertaining, and my kids absolutely love it. So when they come back, and then there's back to the UK, and then there's nothing. There's can't play American football here in the UK, and you can't play baseball here. So they want to do that as part of their birthday party, and really hope that all of their friends and our friends all take part as well. Because if they don't, that's the only real time that they're going to do it. It's the only, So it was really great actually seeing everyone taking part and doing something they haven't done before, and it was really, really cool. But what I would say is we're super inspired by American sport, and that's what made me sad. That's what made me really sad about Jarren Duran, because the American sports environment is so positive. You don't get segregated crowds like you do in soccer in the UK. You can go and you can have banter with the other opposing supporters. They could be sitting right next to you, and and it's super positive. And we mentioned about soccer and those expectations of the crowd and getting on their back and all that kind of thing. And we saw that negativity within West Ham last night, the soccer team, when they lost again, and one of their strikers, Jarren Bowen, got a really hard time from the crowd. So he was fighting back to the crowd. It was just really ugly scenes. And I just thought then that's not going to help him.
No.
And the Jarren Duran thing it's just super sad. And it was really sad to see, and just really disappointing.
So here's a question for you then. Well, it might be a couple of questions as my brain ticks over on this one. So the first thing is, I mean, when we're looking at kids and sport, so this podcast, so you want your kids to be great at sports. If you're putting too much pressure on your kids, the reason you're putting the pressure on the kids is because you probably are a bit wide of the mark and actually want your kids to be a professional sports player. That's probably what you're thinking. I want my kid to be a soccer player, a baseball player, a basketball player, whatever. Team sports come with very passionate fans. With passionate fans become positive, celebrations, cheering, but just as quickly becomes negative criticism and quite a lot of abuse from stands sometimes. So if that is the case, you want your kids to be great at sports, there's a few things you can do. You can coach them, or you can hopefully do the right thing and find somebody else to coach them and help them develop in sports and allow them to be enjoying the sport. And you can allow them to explore other sports to see if they actually find a sport they love. But the role as a parent is to emotionally support the child to cope with the sport at that time, to make them feel like, that they're able to enjoy it and not feel worthless and not put pressure on them when things aren't going well. But then prepare them for the fact that this sport that they might be starting to love has negative sides when it comes to playing in front of people at whatever level that might be, because you've got people that rely on you if you play team sports, whether that be other team members, the managers, the small crowds that might join, even children at soccer on a Sunday morning. You might have 10, 15 people watching, other children's parents, and you're the person that misses the penalty, or you're the person that doesn't save the penalty. How do you prepare your kids? This is the question. How do you prepare your kids for dealing with that pressure? Because I don't think in the episode of the Clubhouse, Duran's dad would have thought that he wasn't doing a good job at helping his son to cope with the pressure, because he was toughening him up.
That's the thing, isn't it? Is actually, if you strike out, if you miss that penalty, it's knowing that the sport is not your identity. And what I mean by that is, if you miss, that doesn't actually make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a bad son. It doesn't make you a bad friend. It doesn't make you a bad teammate. And especially if you've tried your best, you've done everything possible. And it's knowing that your identity is the person you are, rather than the sport that you play. And I think what happens with this kind of parenting from an early age is the child starts to think, well, their identity is what they do on the baseball, well, whatever sport they're playing, their identity is intertwined with their performance. Well, it isn't. And from my perspective, that's why it's so important from a parenting point of view to just be there for the person, be there for the kid, be there for them, and put the sport aside. Because then they're going to has a byproduct of actually making them better in the first place anyway, because they're not going to be so tight. They're going to be able to swing better. They're going to be freer movers and all that kind of stuff. And that's my final point on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you've got to make sure that pressure is off for your children to be able to enjoy it. And I think it is really important to be there when your children want to talk about it, but also encourage positive conversations, because children don't always want to be forthcoming with the conversation, but you need to build that relationship up away from the sport to allow them to be able to talk to you about it. Because if they are getting upset because they haven't hit the ball, or they're getting upset because they've let the goal in, or they're getting upset because they've missed the shot, whatever it might be, they need to know that they've got somebody to come and talk to. Because a really great part of the Duran episode on Clubhouse, which will be my final point on this, is the time that you saw him at his most vulnerable talking to another person was basically between the series of games with the Toronto Blue Jays. He sat in the dugout with one of his closest friends in the sport, an ex-teammate, but actually a member of the opposition at the time, just talking about the pressures and talking about what needed to be done, because he needed that person to talk to. Now, we don't know whether he's got that relationship to go and talk to his dad about these pressures, but the indicators are that he maybe hasn't. But he was there to talk to his friend, and I think you can see that in that discussion there was a lot of pressure that he was dealing with. So I think for parents, certainly what I try and do is to be there for Amelia and Billy if they've got problems, to talk about things, and that should be no different whether it's sports or academics or whatever it be. It's just to support them and let them know that they're supported.
Great speaking with you, Ben, as ever. Please subscribe to the podcast. Please follow us on Instagram as we begin to grow this podcast and reach more parents with our message.
Yeah, and keep sharing the clips if you see them on Instagram. Head over to YouTube, share the full episodes with your friends, because you can watch us on the computer in big screen if you want to stare at us for long enough. Maybe. I don't know. But for another episode of So You Want Your Kids to Be Great at Sport, see you all soon.